Entering the Mayo Experience.
That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by DraftKings. It's time. 2022 Fantasy Football Wide Receiver Rankings. We got to make the list. The list is not done yet. That's why I brought on Mike Leone from EstablishTheRun.com to talk through it. I want to talk through all these guys, see if we can separate them into tiers. I'm going to do the same thing with Seeley for running backs. And then, we probably don't need a quarterbacks and tight end show to do the same thing. That would just be, filling time, unless I need to fill some time. Then we're getting straight to the 150 top rankings and going from there. Michael, it has been since October 24th of last year since you've been on the show. It's prime time for football season now. We got to talk.
Yeah, it's been way too long. Although for me, that might be a good thing because I haven't had to be reminded of the terrible bets that I made in last year's version of getting you prepped for your wide receiver rankings.
This is true, but I parlayed some of that Brendan Cooks money from last year into Brendan Cooks money from this year with your colleague, Justin Herzig, who was on, he was on for two shows. We talked about Week 17 correlations, along with some of the top stacks for DraftKings Best Ball, and we talked overall DraftKings Best Ball strategy. You can find the entire Pat Mayo Experience draft package, completely free, by the way, down in the description of this podcast, this video, whatever it is. All the shows that we've done so far covering fantasy football for the 2022 season are in there. Just go click on it, catch yourself up. You can get yourself up on the podcast feed as well. I'm going to smash the like button for this video and give me your one receiver right now who is being ranked outside the top 10 that you think has the best chance to finish as a top 5 wide receiver in PPR format scoring for this season. I'm curious to see who people think are going to be the Cooper Kupp of 2022. Can't be Cooper Kupp because he's going at number 1 overall right now in terms of wide receiver. So it can't be him. It's got to be someone from down the list that you think is going to have a big breakout season. Additionally, if you want to run your own projections completely free, go over to runthesims.com. You just put in your email address. There is pay stuff on the site for betting and for daily fantasy, but for season-long projections, all that stuff is completely free. Just takes an email, go to the projection builder, and boom, you can customize it any way you want. Create your own rankings once you realize that mine are probably terrible. However, Mike, we did pretty well last year, I thought. The rankings were good.
Yeah, I think we were on Cooper Kupp, if I remember correctly. So I'm just going to assume we were on Cooper Kupp. Let's just put that W in the bank. But yeah, I'm excited for this year's version of the show. I do think wide receiver is a little bit thinner in those like rounds 3 through 6 range. So it'll be interesting to talk through that portion of the draft.
Well, not to jump too far ahead, but I just spoke on the previous show with your colleague, Anthony Amico, and we were talking about the Browns offense. And obviously, I'm going to rally for Brendan Cooks to be higher than he is probably ranked in other places. I'm starting to feel the same way about Amari Cooper, that even if it's Jacoby Brissett throwing in the ball for 17 games, who else is taking targets away? And you can say David Njoku all you want. It's not happening.
No, it's the David Njoku play is really an efficiency bet. I don't think he's going to get a ton of targets. So I'm with you on Amari Cooper. I think the market's overreacted a little bit to the expectation of Watson being suspended for possibly the entire season. I'm looking at our rankings right now, and we've got him around wide receiver 27 in full PPR. The ADP is now getting dragged down more towards wide receiver 30. So I feel like at that point, given his talent, he's still in, the tail end of his peak years, but he's still in his peak years. Talented wide receiver. I think Cooper is a little bit undervalued.
Yeah, especially with, obviously if we're talking like upside type things here, like he could lead the league in target share this year. That wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility based on the receiving core that Cleveland has. Now they're not going to throw the ball a ton, so it might not be the overall target leader, but he could be definitely top 5.
Yeah, and I actually like a couple of receivers from Cleveland. I like the rookie David Bell quite a bit. I'm sure if you had Amico on, he talked about David Bell because he's really, really high on David Bell. But I think Bell in his short 8-out role, just a lot of uncertainty with him being a rookie. People just don't really want to draft a secondary Cleveland wide receiver at all at this point. And him and Cooper kind of, I'm not sure I would want to double up on them in a draft because I'm not sure the overall team passing volume is going to be there for them both to hit their upside cases, but they're both good gambles individually at their price tags.
Well, let's jump into the tiers. Wide receiver rankings for 2022. I'm going to give you a list of 10 guys right now, and we'll see actually a list of 8 guys. I think there's a pretty clear 8 guys. Maybe we can bump some guys up, bump some guys down. But for the first 2 tiers of this, Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Davante Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, Stefan Diggs. Is there anyone else you would throw into that overall conversation, do you think?
I like, you said Mike Evans, right? Yeah.
Yep.
No, I think that's pretty good. Maybe Keenan Allen at the back end of that group.
All right. So is there a distinct tier 1 of these guys? Like if we're thinking about number 1 overall, you'd be hard pressed to, let's make the case against Cooper Kupp as the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. Historic year coming off that. Probably unlikely to repeat itself, although you could take 75% of his year, he'd probably still be the number 1 receiver. He has some challengers coming up through the rear. You add Allen Robinson to this offense. Maybe that does take away a little bit. Maybe offenses are more keen to key in on him. Like, what are the huge, and this is just, we're not going to talk about injury because anyone can get injured, and therefore you're not number 1 anymore. But is there any realistic case where you wouldn't rank Cooper Kupp number 1?
No, quite frankly, I think he's clearly the number 1. His role is just insane. You know, not just in terms of target share, but his combination of a super high catch rate, good yards per catch, plus a red zone role. It's really tough to go against that. I mean, if you were playing devil's advocate, I guess you'd say target share comes back down a little bit with Allen Robinson there. The team maybe doesn't have to throw a ton because they're just a really strong team, and McVay will play the game script. He's not going to be a real high pass rate over expectation type of coach. And the efficiency in terms of yards per catch comes back down to earth, even if he has high catch rate. And then that would allow some of these younger wide receivers like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson that have a huge ceiling in terms of efficiency and could dominate team targets to maybe pave the way for them. That would be the case against Cooper Kupp. But for me, I'm taking him number 1. I think I think you can tier him with the other guys though. Like I think Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are in a tier 1 with him, possibly Davante Adams too. I think there's a top 3 to 4 that I would designate before getting into CeeDee Lamb and the other guys.
I am on the same page with you in terms of Kupp probably being as a part of that tier. However, I'm looking at the runthesims.com projections. Go sign up, create your own for free, adjust these however you like. In full point PPR scoring, the difference between Cooper Kupp, who projects as number 1, and Jamar Chase, who projects as number 2, is currently 71 points.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that would make him on a tier by himself at that point.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what we have here. I don't have it real quickly on the back end.
Good prep.
Yeah, that would make him a tier 1 by himself. He's probably close to a tier 1 by himself. It's more of a pro Jefferson Chase argument, I think, than it is an anti-Kupp argument. Like a little bit of regression for Kupp, and then those guys. I mean, Jefferson and Chase are so unique in terms of the combination of youth, talent, already have a production profile that we can lean on, and they're both in offenses that could be taking steps forward. You know, Minnesota in terms of having a new coach that might not be as boring as the old coach and pass more frequently. That could be a big deal for Jefferson and Chase. You could also see with Joe Burrow, second year back from the ACL injury, insanely efficient last year. Do they open up the passing game a little bit more?
So Kupp right now we have projected at 29% market share in this offense and a 34% touchdown share of the receiving touchdowns on the team. Like that doesn't even sound outrageous, and that still makes him over 70 points better than everyone else.
Yeah, and our base target share is 28% for Cooper Kupp. We always project a little bit more than 100% for all the teams just to be conservative given the chaos of an NFL season. So he gets scaled down to 26.5%, still puts him at 162 targets on the season, 9.5 a game. And the big thing for him is catch rate in full PPR leagues. He is going to catch 70% plus of his balls. He has done it 4 consecutive years. He's caught at least 70% of his passes. And you mentioned the touchdowns. I think he fits in really well with Stafford in red zone role. So I don't know if there's much more to say about Kupp. I think he's really safe. I think it would take an injury for him to fall out of the top 5 wide receivers this year.
And this is something that Amico and I talked about a little bit on our show in terms of relative value. Like, if you take Cooper Kupp at number 3 overall and he ends up being wide receiver 4 this year, that's fine. And I think that people forget that. Obviously, you would want him to be number 1 by and large, but if you're being picked 3rd overall or even 1st overall in a lot of circumstances, it's going to be tough to outperform your draft position when you're going that high. The key is, like, you want that safety along with the upside of some of these guys. Now, injuries can always wipe that out, but if you're looking at floor, it just doesn't seem like anyone is on his level, especially from a week-to-week consistency type of basis, and that gets lost. I think that's something to keep in mind for, like, the first 5 rounds of an NFL draft, that, like, even if you take in round 5 or round 4, let's say, and you have pick number 46, like, well, if he doesn't finish wide receiver number 3, then it was a waste of pick. It's like, no, if he was the 46th best player in fantasy that year where you took him, you'll live with that. You're trying to win your leagues by hitting on your round 17 guy, aren't you?
Yeah, and in terms of floor too, I think that, circles back to how I have these tiers where I don't see worlds where Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Davante Adams are healthy for a full season and don't finish, in the top 10 wide receivers overall. Whereas you start getting into CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, I do see some routes where they have a full season and they could be a little bit disappointing if things just don't play out exactly as we hope.
Well, let's get to the next 2 that you keep mentioning, Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Obviously, we saw the skill set. That was one that we nailed last year. At least I nailed. I don't know about you. I don't know if we made any Jamar Chase bets, but I was very big.
Oh, yeah. We were both pro Chase. Chase was my biggest hit of anything last year. So I was very pumped for that season.
And because you're in a safe space on the Pat Mayo Experience, we don't talk about our losses, which were many bad calls.
We don't need to talk about Odell Beckham, Laviska Shenault. No, we don't need to talk about them. Let's just talk about Jamar Chase.
Well, those are your misses. That's where I won the money off you because you bet on those losers. Like, good God, man. Who's the Laviska Shenault of this year? Is it Rondell Moore again?
I like Rondell Moore. Rondell Moore's not nearly. I think the Shenault thing. I don't know. Rondell Moore is probably a good comp. I think Sky Moore is kind of similar. I guess Rondell's a better comp because we have a year of him not doing super well and he had some chances. And whereas like Sky Moore, we just don't know. There's more uncertainty in it. And I'm just trying to think of guys that are inflated who were thought of as undervalued prospects. And as a result, I think we root for them more than we should, if that makes sense, where we're like, oh, this guy that we really liked as a prospect, he got drafted in the 2nd round. And like, even like Sky Moore, for example, like so many wide receivers went before him. Like I like Sky Moore. I'm glad that he won in the 2nd round. His landing spot was amazing, but ultimately I do think we need to be somewhat grounded that he was, 10 wide receivers went before him in the draft.
Oh, so what you're talking about is the Twitter bubble circle jerk wide receiver every year?
Yeah. And I definitely get caught up in that. I'm a Rondell Moore stan. His ADP is definitely more palatable than Chenault's for a couple of years there. We were really chasing. I think the key though is to be careful is to not buy the upside. Brandon Ayuk was a guy last year that I loved in a vacuum, right? Like this is the type of guy that has a huge breakout profile, but it just got to a point with his ADP where it wasn't worth taking him because it was completely baked in, all that stuff, and none of the risk was baked in. So whenever you're taking a player, you do need to kind of consider where they're going. How much upside is there beyond that? Is the risk being taken into account? And, we kind of have blind spots for guys that we like in a vacuum, and then everyone starts to like them. We need to be able to reevaluate and readjust on those players.
Brandon Ayuk this year, a much better value, I think. We had I think we had the Deebo versus Ayuk discussion from last year. I think that was when I had my Deebo is TO comp. That was a good one.
More hits for us. Deebo, yeah, Deebo came through huge. And that was like a crazy price discrepancy. Like those two should have been priced similarly last year. I thought Deebo was a favorite to out target Ayuk last year. And they ended up at times being 4 rounds apart. It was kind of nuts. We see that with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett this year too. Like at one point I tweeted earlier in the offseason, they were 26 wide receiver spots apart, which just, even if you give all the tiebreakers to DK Metcalf, which probably you should based on his age and his profile, it's not a 26 wide receiver difference. You know what I mean? Like it's a 10 to 15 wide receiver difference.
If you like Sky Moore so much, I am willing to let your $200 right now. We'll go 100 right now. I'll take MVS versus Sky Moore, no question right now.
No, I think MVS is. I said Sky Moore is like this year's Chenault, man. So I'm kind of.
That's your guy. You were willing to bet on Chenault last year.
Yeah, I'm adjusting my priors. I'm getting better. This is growth mindset. Okay. No, I'm not taking that. I think MVS is, he's definitely more like his median outcome too is a lot better. I think his ceiling maybe is a little bit lower than Sky Moore. It's just because I don't think he can ever be this big time target earner, where Sky Moore, there's more uncertainty there. But they just paid MVS, 3 years, 30 million. I mean, he's gonna play. There's a lot more certainty there. So I'm not taking that one. We'll find a bet. It's not that one.
Justin Jefferson, let's get to him. I believe my initial rankings that I jotted down, I had him at number 2. I feel like he is the biggest threat to become the number 1 wide receiver. And you kind of hit on it, where you get rid of Mike Zimmer as the head coach, Kevin O'Connell in, Clint Kubiak as the OC. This could really work out well if it's a more pass-heavy offense. And you think they want to limit what they do with Dalvin Cook because he's been banged up for so much. A high-efficiency type role from Dalvin Cook just kind of trumps everything in that offense if you can really utilize him properly. And Jefferson has just taken over the reins from Adam Thielen in this offense. I guess the one drawback is that Minnesota actually has a bunch of good red zone threats that aren't Justin Jefferson for him hitting his overall upside. Like, as much as people want to bag on Thielen, it's like, oh, well, touchdown regression has to be coming for Adam Thielen. It's like, maybe they just run a lot of plays for Adam Thielen in the red zone because he's good at those routes. He's good at creating space within 5 yards of the goal line, and he's just open every single time. There's a reason that his touchdowns continue to spike. It would be like saying, and I don't know if this is going to be the case with Davante Adams, we get to him. It's like the Packers would get to the 5-yard line. Rodgers would look around. He's like, oh yeah, I know how I can just give this little signal to Davante Adams. He's going to be wide open, and I'm just going to throw to him every time. Not sure that manifests itself as much in Vegas, but at least we know with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback and Adam Thielen on the field, they just like throwing to him. And you're going to get Big Irv. I mean, how can you love Justin Jefferson so much when Big Irv is going to be the number 1 tight end?
Dude, Big Irv at one point this offseason was such good value, but unfortunately it did not last. Like, people, he could just do what Ty Conklin did last year and be worth what his ADP is. And he's, better than Ty Conklin. But yeah, well, the way we do TD rates is we kind of have 2 benchmark TD rates for a player. One is just a naturally regressed touchdown rate based on, layering in some league average stuff with their historical numbers. And Adam Thielen kind of crushes Justin Jefferson in that regard because he's been so high, and Jefferson doesn't have as high of a sample as Thielen does because we go back 3 seasons. Then we have a second touchdown rate that's based off their ADOT and their profile a little bit more. And Jefferson slightly edges out Thielen there. When you balance them out, we definitely expect Thielen to have a higher TD rate than Justin Jefferson, but I think it'll be closer than in years past. It did seem like they were running some of those goal line plays for Jefferson last season. And when you're just as talented as him, you're going to turn some targets into touchdowns. He's got 17 touchdowns through 2 years. So it's not like he's been lacking in the touchdown department. He's just, might not have that 16 TD upside. But
that's the thing. If we're talking about number 1 wide receiver, what he does to, let's say Kupp just regresses a little bit in terms of overall numbers by 15%, whatever it might be, Jefferson needs to step up into that 14 touchdown, 15 touchdown sphere in order to have a chance to be at number 1. And I think that he can do that. That's why I'm going to rank him at number 2. Maybe we see a bit of a drop off from Thielen, but Thielen's actually shaping up to be a pretty good value right now.
Yeah. I mean, he's the type of guy I always have. This was kind of Thielen for me last year too. I have these guys where I go as conservatively as I possibly can with their inputs sometimes, and they still pop as okay values. And that's the point where you just can be like, okay, this might not be the archetype of wide receiver that I like to target, but that's being fully baked into the market, and I'm taking him. It does seem like he's crept up a little bit. He was like wide receiver 36 plus for a while. I'm seeing him closer to wide receiver 30. He seems, he's fine. I guess I don't love him, but I don't hate him either.
Yeah, we haven't projected as wide receiver number 25. I don't know how much I buy into that. Plus, we do have his touchdown share lower than Justin Jefferson's in the median projections that Run the Sims is pumping out right now. And that makes sense when you look at the overall scope. It just, in certain parts of the field, once we're in close, does that lean more towards Adam Thielen because he's going to get those looks, it seems, regardless of how well or not well he's playing in between the 20s. And maybe this is the year that he falls off the cliff. The weird thing is, when you look at the rest of Minnesota's receiving core, like KJ Osborne's coming back, and then you have Alanis Marset, who they're bringing in. Like, I don't know if these guys actually factor into anything, do they? Or is KJ Osborne going to do what he did last year, come back healthy and be like, hey, I'm going to have some of these games where I have 7 for 79?
I think it's going to be pretty concentrated. We are conservative on Thielen's target share, just given the age and like the cliff drop off that there can be. But I don't see Osborne being more than like low double digits, maybe mid-teens target share guy. But as you said, even beyond him, there's not that many guys. So I expect them to play pretty tight. And there's some teams like this, Cincinnati last year, for example, people are, and this feeds into Jamar Chase, who's next in line, but people sometimes are so worried about, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, how can they both get targets? And then you look and it's like, okay, they have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, CJ Uzama, but literally nobody else plays. Like, they just don't get on the field. They have a certain personnel that they're using all the time. Now, new coach in Minnesota, we're not entirely certain what the personnel package is going to be, but I expect we're going to see really heavy concentrated target share and usage on 4 to 5 guys, and the peripheral guys on Minnesota just aren't going to see the field that much, where there are some teams where there's some pesky, annoying guys that are going to siphon off 5 to 10% target share, and it adds up.
And even with the names that you rattled through with pertaining to Jamar Chase right now, like CJ Uzama is gone. You have the sampler, Drew Sample, and Hayden Hurst at tight end. You're probably going to see a lower market share combined from Hurst and Sample and the rest than you probably saw from Uzama and Sample last year. I would say probably slightly less, which leaves even more room for Boyd, for Chase, and for Higgins. I'm not sure what to make of it. Like, you have to rank Chase at number 2 or number 3, and hell, number 1 if you really wanted to. The only thing that I worry about is that, can he just score 70-yard touchdowns all the time? Like, doesn't eventually teams are like, man, we should really do something about this.
Yeah, the thing, though, is with T. Higgins' talent, who I'm really high on, and with Joe Burrow's talent, I'm not sure there's too much teams can do. And Chase came in, and part of the reason we liked him so much last year, people were so worried about like this BS, he can't catch the ball in the offseason and all this, he took a year off and all this stuff, when he's had one of the best wide receiver prospect profiles that we've seen the last decade. This wasn't just like a good prospect who had a good year. This was an amazing prospect who had an amazing rookie season. His combination of ADOT and yards after catch is really unique. So reminds me of AJ Brown a little bit in some ways, where you get this guy that can win down the field, but then he can also take a slant or a screen to the house, which we've seen Jamar Chase do. And it becomes tough to keep a player like that down. I think he's less likely to see the volume overall that Jefferson and Kupp are, which is why I have him third, but it's a really close third because he's the type of talent that you want to bet on. Ben Gretsch always tells me, we want small losses and big hits is what we're going for. And I think guys like Chase epitomize that, where maybe off the total volume, he finishes, wide receiver 5 instead of wide receiver 3 as we hit on. But he also has the elite skill set where if T. Higgins gets hurt or this team decides they're going to throw as much as Kansas City does, all of a sudden he's got a Cooper Kupp type season in his outcomes in terms of total fantasy points.
So this is the way that I have them ranked, and that's actually the order that they're being drafted in right now. So cutting analysis from the two of us. Kupp, Jefferson, Chase, 1, 2, 3. Kupp's going on average around pick number 3 overall. Jefferson going at 5. Jamar Chase at 7. Do you think those are appropriate spots for those guys, or do you like to go up the board for the safe wide receiver rather than taking even a Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris, the other guys that are going in that mix, along with Derrick Henry and who was the other one there? Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, like those types, knowing that it's more valuable to your team if you hit on the awesome running back who doesn't get hurt, also knowing that their floors are non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm in a managed league, I really want one of these top 3 wide receivers to build my team around, where you have to pick which receivers you're taking each week. Having these guys baked in is just such a huge deal and a huge win. And again, you're de-risking your first round pick because you don't have the injury rates and the bust rates that you do at the running back position. So I'd have them even further up the board. In best ball, it's a little bit trickier where you don't have the waiver wire to replace running back production. That's a big deal. You can also take advantage of spike weeks from wide receivers that don't see a ton of targets because you don't have to decide ahead of time who's in your starting lineup, and you can make up for passing on one of these guys. And I think in those types of leagues, the rankings you gave are accurate. But for a managed league, I don't know if I'd say I have them 1 through 3, but I have them in the top 5, these 3 wide receivers.
I could see even starting your drafts 1, 2, 3 with these guys, and simply what you've kind of alluded to, that best ball versus season long, when you have to manage a league and you have to start guys every single week and make those critical decisions. Yes, it would be awesome to have 17 games of Jonathan Taylor. I would rather take 17 games of Jonathan Taylor over 17 games of Cooper Kupp. Although it is not a guarantee that Cooper Kupp plays all 17 games. We know, he's been hurt midseason before. That it's just more likely, like you mentioned, that the bust rates for wide receivers are a whole lot lower. Although we saw a lot of attrition from like the top 12 wide receivers last year. We got like a new influx, like a new crop. It seemed like a lot of the guys that had been there for the past 5-6 years kind of aged out, got injured, whatever it may be, and allowed this new class of guys to step up. But the waiver wire, I think, is the biggest thing with all of this, where you can't replace people on your best ball team. It's really hard to find receivers off the waiver wire, like maybe 1 or 2 come around throughout the course of the season that you're going to play every single week in your season-long league. Whereas you can find a running back to plug in every week if you really wanted to. They may not be great, but you're going to find like 5 to 10 every year that are just starters for multiple weeks on your fantasy team, top 20 plays. And then you have your like 20 to 40 ranked guys during the week who could pop up, like like the old school Bilal Powells of the world. Like those guys are fine for a 1 or 2 week plug if someone on your team gets hurt.
Especially if you're in a PPR league where you want, wide receivers are just going to outscore running backs in PPR leagues overall. So if you want your third wide receiver to crush other teams' third wide receivers, if you want your flex spot to be a good wide receiver, well, you have to start that first wide receiver early. You can't draft 4 wide receivers at the same time in round 4. You got to start with wide receiver 1 early. And the Bilal Powells of the world are more usable as a pickup in full PPR leagues. You can just find these guys that can get you 10 points, and they might not get absolutely killed at the position. Even someone like Jonathan Taylor, we saw at times last year, the weekly floor, you had the game against Jacksonville at the end of the year. You hate to just cherry pick one game, but someone who doesn't, how many targets did he have the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season? It wasn't many at all. So if the game script doesn't go right, even for a guy like JT, like it could get to the point where it's just an average score that becomes much more replaceable than what you're going to see with these top 3 wide receivers.
You're also looking at a situation now where so much has been written about, and it's come to fruition the past few years, is that people do want to take these running backs early, because once you get the middle of the 3rd round through rounds 8, it's just been labeled the running back dead zone. But I think that the efficiency in the ADP market has kind of factored that out a little bit, because everyone is now realizing what's going on with these 4th round, 5th round running backs. The guys that would normally be going in the 4th and 5th round are just now going in the 8th and 9th round. That maybe there is something to taking advantage of that overall public perception. It was like the year that finally everyone decided 0 RB is the move. You know what the move was? To draft a running back early. But for years when everyone was going running back, the move was just to take wide receivers early.
Yeah, and last year running back, and then hitting wide receivers worked really well. This year, to your point, I'm not sure that's exactly the case. I think the wide receivers, we have uniquely talented wide receivers at the top of this draft. And I think the wide receivers in rounds 3 through 6 are a little bit riskier and not as good as the wide receivers last year. That couples with the fact that, at least at times during the offseason, Aaron Jones and Saquon Barkley are going round 3. It seems like they've moved more into round 2. But even someone like a J.K. Dobbins is available like the end of round 5. These are players that in previous years would have gone round 3. The guys in the 7th, 8th round, Miles Sanders, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, like you can get by. Like those guys are really risky when you're taking them over the Cooper Kupps that were last year in rounds 4 or 5 and giving up that wide receiver upside. When you're taking them past Brandon Cooks and guys like that, it's a different ball game.
I would even wager that I don't understand why Cam Akers is going in the 4th round. That makes absolutely no sense to me. That might be, at least in my mind, this early on, the number 1 pick in fantasy football.
I didn't even know which way we were going to go with that because I've seen people that are very staunchly for Cam Akers, very staunchly against. I am super boring and I have him neutral. Where
Can you please describe to me the case against Cam Akers? Like, I don't understand it.
Yeah, he comes back from the injury maybe a little bit too soon. We don't know if the health's in a great spot. He was extremely inefficient on the ground game. And we saw in the Super Bowl that, Darrell Henderson was just a more effective back for them because of his ability to pass catch. So the bull case for Akers is easy. Is McVay likes to lean on one guy. If he leans on Cam Akers, there's almost no way it goes wrong barring injury because they're going to get so many red zone touches and I'll get some catches. The bear case is that Cam Akers came back from a pretty serious injury, came back early, just isn't that good anymore, isn't the pass game running back, and all of a sudden the floor starts to become a lot shakier.
I would push back on that. Anyone gleaning that much from Cam Akers returning in record time from an Achilles tear, and then all of a sudden he's an inefficient back because he was probably like 50% when he was playing. And we did see that inefficiency. It was a nice spot to pick on Cam Akers unders in the prop market because it didn't make any. It was even like when Derrick Henry came back when he shouldn't have come back. These guys wanted to play, they got out there, but now he's had 8 months left to heal. If he was able to come back and play at an NFL level, despite being inefficient 3 months after tearing his Achilles, I would wager that and I am going to wager on it by taking Cam Akers wherever I can, that 8 months later, he probably looks a little bit better.
Yeah. And I probably overplayed the efficiency angle. I'm just kind of trying to make the bear bull cases. Like, again, I have him neutral. I guess a simpler way to put it is that Cam Akers is now a 2-down back. And anytime you're taking a 2-down back in the first, in round at like the 3-4 turn or whatever, there's a lot of risk in doing so. The offense has to be as good as we think it will be. The efficiency has to be there, and it's a little bit concerning.
I would think that with the potential upside that can go along with that pick, that I'm willing to waste. If it's the first pick of the 4th round and Cam Akers is sitting there, I just don't see why you wouldn't shoot for all that upside. We talked about you do want to draft guys who do have that floor, and maybe with the case that you're making, he doesn't. But if you want to talk about people overperforming and returning value on a pick, like, just circle that one.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't have anything against it. I see both arguments, quite frankly, and I'm very boring neutral on Cam Akers.
I mean, that's why you're a projection guy. You got to be boring and neutral. Hot takes are not long for the projection market, sir.
Yeah, you get burned on those. You learn fast.
I mean, when you had Shenault ranked as wide receiver 1 last year, I thought it was a bit crazy, but hey, what do I know? Let's talk.
The math always works out for you if you just give a guy a higher target share than he should have.
Of course. And maybe the offense would be somewhat competent. I think we all kind of missed on. We didn't think that Lawrence was just going to be awful.
Yeah, or, I mean, we maybe should have seen the Urban Meyer train wreck coming a little bit more. That it's just so bad.
Let's talk about Davante Adams, because I think that I'm good with tier 1 being Kupp, Jefferson, and Chase. And I know that most people would put Davante Adams on this tier, but we just kind of spelled out a more viable case, obviously, against Cam Akers returning. I mean, a guy who's being drafted like 7th overall last year is now going 41st overall because he tore his Achilles. Fair. I guess that part is fair. Can you come back and be that other guy again? Although much of him going number 7 overall was us trying to complete a story and baking out all of his upside in a situation with Adams. Yeah. How much of it was Rodgers? Because I'm concerned that a lot of it was Rodgers.
I think that's an extremely valid concern because, it was absolutely a unique connection, particularly in the red zone. And initially, my thought was coming into the year, Davante Adams is going to be quite overvalued. And doing more projections work, my take has sort of morphed that I think this Las Vegas offense is going to attempt so many more passes than the Green Bay offense did last year that the downside to leaving Aaron Rodgers basically gets canceled out.
But you're working on 2 levels here, though, because there's a bunch of different factors that go into it. Yes, I agree with you that the Raiders will probably pass more than the 2021 Packers did, but the same time, there is that red zone efficiency and the connection that he had with Rodgers, especially by the goal line. We kind of like half-heartedly joked about it with Thielen, which I do believe is a real thing, but could be going away.
I think it's a real thing.
I mean, it has been a thing with Adams his entire, even when Adams wasn't good in terms of fantasy. And like he was just on the radar. He was still scoring touchdowns. That was still he and Rodgers' connection. Is he going to have that with Carr? Well, maybe, but Carr's not half as good as Rodgers, so that has to hurt him. And that's kind of the thing. Like, even though they weren't passing a ton, the efficiency between Rodgers and Adams was through the roof because Rodgers is one of the best quarterbacks of all time, and Derek Carr is good, but he's just a guy. He is not the worst quarterback in the league. He's not the best quarterback in the league. He's somewhere in the middle, and that's fine for the overall numbers. Like, I'm looking at more like a rushing rate of 42% for the Raiders this year, which means they'll pass with Josh McDaniels as their head coach around, 58% of the time. And I have him at a 25% market share in this offense because he has to compete with Hunter Renfrow, with Darren Waller. And if they start throwing to running backs at all, he has to compete with those guys for share as well. Keelan Cole is just randomly on this team, basically replacing Zay Jones. He or even Demarcus Robinson, who's probably just there to give them intel on the Chiefs offense. Either way, there's just more bodies around than whatever was going on in Green Bay last year. Like Robert Tonyan was the second option on that team, and he got hurt. Like, who else could they throw to besides Davante Adams? 25 seems like a pretty reasonable number. If he goes over it, I'm not going to be stunned, but I think that's a fair projection because he could go under that in this offense as well. And a 25% market share of targets in the Raiders offense with a 58% passing rate from Derek Carr and a catch rate over 73%. He's wide receiver 10 in PPR for me.
See, I think you might it's more you being aggressive on some other guys because honestly those inputs aren't crazy far off from what we have. I have a base target share before getting scaled down a little bit of 25% for Davante Adams to account for the fact that it's much more competition than he had in Green Bay. But I do also, we bake in upside cases for guys as well. So our rankings aren't purely based off a base projection scenario. And one of the reasons why we have upside cases for guys is because certain guys, if things break right, we know could earn like a shit ton of targets. So this was part of the reason why we liked Stephon Diggs 2 years ago coming to Buffalo, because even though it looked crowded when he came into Buffalo and John Brown was there and Cole Beasley was there, we're like, he has the type of talent that he could earn a big target share that ended up coming to fruition. Same thing with Davante Adams. Like, we have to account for the fact that this dude has had a 33-ish% target share year in and year out. So I think he has that type of talent. So I want to bake that upside case in, even though I agree from base projection scenario, putting him at 25%. And I think we have Las Vegas throwing a little bit more aggressively than you. We have them at a 63% pass rate in terms of called plays. Now that includes sacks and scrambles. So it's going to be a little bit, it's not 1-to-1 to the number that you gave. I was trying to do the conversion real quick, but I didn't have time. And I think, between Josh McDaniels and how the team called plays last year and between, the competitiveness of the AFC West, that they're going to have to throw the ball a good bit. So more team pass volume. And also, like, this is going to be, even though there's a lot more bodies to throw to, I think it's going to be kind of like the Minnesota-Cincinnati thing where we're not going to see a lot of peripheral guys come into play. Could be wrong there. And if, like, injuries happen to other guys too, right? Like if Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow goes down, all of a sudden that we know Davante Adams can earn 30+% targets. Whereas, some of these other spots, look at CeeDee Lamb in the next tier. We don't we're hoping he can earn like a huge target share with Amari Cooper down, but we don't know that's true. We don't know that's the case. Whereas Adams, we have a good bit of history and we know in a certain circumstance that he can. I also think you might be shortchanging Derek Carr a little bit, even though it sounds like your catch rate's pretty high, but Derek Carr's been just under 8 yards per attempt, 3 straight seasons. His completion rate is huge. So that's going to play well for a guy like Adams in full PPR leagues. Completion rate's around like 69% over the last 3 seasons in aggregate. And then Adams has a high catch rate. Like, he could be catching just an absurd percentage of his balls.
I can see that, but he caught an absurd percentage of his balls from Aaron Rodgers at the same time, and those were more likely Rodgers not afraid to squeeze it into some space when it comes to Davante Adams. I just worry if Derek Carr starts trying to do that completion rate goes down and those turn into picks.
Yeah, I guess I just don't see that given Carr's ability to complete passes at such a high rate over the last few seasons. And I think Davante Adams' talent is I mean, I just think he's really talented. So for me, it's just like an offset. I mean, this is the guy we were talking about as like the consensus wide receiver 1 last year. So even dropping him to wide receiver 4 and saying he's clearly 4 and he's not in the top 3 is a drop off from last year.
Well, I have just boosted up just to see what the projections would say. And the reason that we do this show and talk through tiers and rankings is because you can just go to any site, print off the projections and be like, well, those are my rankings. You probably do pretty well, to be perfectly honest with you. But I do think that there is nuance to some of these rankings, that just because one guy, like I said, projects as wide receiver 10, I'm pretty sure that Run the Sims has Deebo ahead of him, which I don't agree with whatsoever. I think that guy is a potential huge bust candidate this year in terms of where he's being drafted. I'm going to be substantially lower on him than the projections would indicate. And with Adams, I'm going to have him above wide receiver 10, but I just bumped up the pass rate to a full 60% for the Raiders, the target share for 30% with Davante Adams, and just touch those two things. So more passing and 5% percentage points higher in terms of the market share of targets. And that still only gets him to wide receiver 4. So he's still behind those.
You got to have some optimistic inputs on some of these other guys. Cause I mean, that sounds, that's basically what we have is 60%. I did strip out the sacks and the scramble. So we have 59.7% pass rate. When you strip that out with basically a 25% base target share and a 31% ceiling target share. So either we're expecting a lot more efficiency from Vegas, or we're just being a little bit more conservative on the competing players.
I think that's probably what it is, because after the top 3, once you get down into the like Adams and like below, all the guys are separated by like 15 to 20 fantasy points in PPR overall, which is a pretty slim margin. Like one guy misses one game and he's at the very bottom of that list, and those circumstances happen. But I just wanted to try to prop him up to be as close to the other guys as possible and how that would actually come to fruition. And he's still well behind Chase and well behind Justin Jefferson, obviously Cooper Kupp, because I wanted to have the tier discussion that I think that Davante Adams may be the best guy of tier 2, but I think that he's in the tier 2 now.
Yeah, I can buy that. We can meet in the middle. We'll put him tier 2 and we'll put him at the top.
Well, we'll see here, because I want to talk about Mike Evans. Why can't Mike Evans go back to being the Mike Evans when people remember me from fantasy football? It was, Mike Evans that year with Jameis. Like, you got to draft this guy in the first or second round. Don't let him get past the middle of the second round if you have the pick. Don't wait for him. Like, if you're at the back end of the second round, you're kind of screwed unless he falls, because you're going to need this guy. And he was great. And it worked into a situation where who else is going to get targets on this team? Now, that's not the case anymore. But I don't know how long Godwin's going to be injured for. And I think this Russell Gage thing has been completely blown out of proportion. But the single biggest thing for Mike Evans, and while I don't think that Gronk actually stays retired the entire year, I set the line with Amico at like week 12 seems like the perfect scenario for Gronk to come back. Take 10 weeks off, buy a week for Tampa Bay, you're back in week 12. Everything is solved. Let's try to go win a Super Bowl. That makes a lot of logical sense to me. But it'll probably be a ramp-up time, so you're probably going to get basically non-Gronk weeks if he comes back at all, like 14, 15, whatever. All those red zone targets aren't going to Cameron Brate or that creative player that Tampa's talking about. They're going to Mike Evans.
Yeah, I mean, I love Mike Evans. I think like the difference between him and Davante Adams, I just, in full PPR league, feel more confident in the total targets for Davante Adams, but you can make an argument that that's not even the case given Tampa Bay's play calling, which is, hey, we're going to throw the ball all game, no matter what. The best way to win a game is not to nurse a 3-touchdown lead. It's to extend it and just win by as large of a margin as possible. And that's not going to change as long as Tom Brady is there. And it's a perfect storm for Evans to just have a nuclear, particularly first half of the season with Godwin out and Gronk at least pseudo retired for the time being. So I'm really high on Mike Evans. He's someone that I feel like we're almost being conservative with, and we have him pretty clearly as a top 10 wide receiver. And, even right now, I think I'm bumping him up a little bit because I do think he's definitely in that mix as one of the best wide receivers after that top tier.
So you have Davante Adams and Mike Evans in tier 2. I think that CeeDee Lamb is clearly the other guy with those two guys in tier 2. Like, where are these passes going that aren't to CeeDee Lamb? Can have Dalton Schultz? Great, that's fine. Have as many as you want, Dalton. CeeDee Lamb, there's a reason that they got rid of Amari Cooper.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned. I love CeeDee Lamb. We have him.
It doesn't sound like you like CeeDee Lamb is the thing.
I just feel like the upside is really being baked in a ton with CeeDee Lamb. Like we have him as wide receiver 5/6, and overall though we have him behind ADP, and he's had games. I mean, like last year in the playoffs where he's just sort of disappeared. And I'm always careful with anybody. This isn't necessarily CeeDee Lamb specific, but just thrusting volume on guys because the opportunity is there. And I do think CeeDee Lamb is really talented. We have him for a pretty strong target share, but
what is your target share on him?
We have him at like 23%.
Okay, that is exactly what we have him at 23% right now. I think it's over that.
Yeah. I guess that's what it comes down to is like, how much are you? We have our upside case for him, like 27%, which I guess could be a little bit higher. Or his base could just be a little bit higher where maybe he doesn't have the 30+% ceiling, but he's just really likely to be like 25% because of the makeup of the team with Amari Cooper down. And that's where it's good for people listening to know projections. I think sometimes people say, oh, trust the math or whatever. And there's a lot of human inputs in here. So garbage in, garbage out. And sometimes there's a lot of assumptions being made. And it's hard to figure out what to assume for CeeDee Lamb because quite frankly, we don't know what's going to happen with Amari Cooper gone.
Well, where are the targets going on this team? That like, what is going to be the health status of Michael Gallup? Is he going to be a week 1 ready guy, or is he a pup-less candidate?
I think he's absolutely a pup-less candidate. The injury happened so late in the season. I've heard people are saying he's really ahead of timelines, but we hear that quite often as guys are working their way back. Generally, the picture's a little bit rosier, and if it's not, it's a huge red flag. So I'm worried, but I think it could just be spread out a little bit, even to guys that are kind of no names. I think Tolbert, James Washington are going to see some targets. I think we'll just see it sprinkled around. They're going to use the running backs in the passing game. We should see a target share in the high teens between Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott, and I think it could just add up little sprinkles here and there. Is sort of my concern, the way that Dallas plays, very spread and up tempo, that's what's going to happen. And when I say concern, like I have CeeDee Lamb's top 5 wide receiver. I think some people have him like first round. I just don't have him as a first round guy.
I can see it. Now, I do think you are inheriting a lot of upside risk by taking him at number 9 overall or something like that. But if, like you said, the ceiling projection in terms of market share was like 27%, like why can't it be 33% on this team? There's a reason, like they went out and they got this guy in the first round when they already had a number 1 receiver in an offense that does want to pass more than I think that people think. Like you said, they want to play up tempo. They want to pass.
They want to run a lot of plays,
which is usually
kind of neutral on pass rate.
Well, that's fine.
Have volume.
If you run more plays, then I don't care if you're 50-50. That's better than being the 60-40 team who just runs slow as molasses. I want the high pace team. I want Dak throwing the ball to CeeDee Lamb. That sounds like a good scenario for me. I like Dalton Schultz as well, and like I have his input at like 17% market share, but I think that Justin's with you when he did our projections, like 15% for Gallup, 11% for Tolbert, 3% for Noah Brown, James Washington 5%, like
5%. Yeah, James Washington's gonna be more than that.
But with Tolbert at 11.
Well, I have Gallup a little bit lower because I'm more concerned about the injury.
All right, so yeah, when you take the summation of those guys' market share and add them up, like it sounds like we're right around the same lane. Like I don't see why we can't just tick up 23 to 30, drop Gallup, drop Tolbert, bump up James Washington a little bit, and we're off to the races. Like that's the upside.
I mean, you look at the game log from CeeDee though. There's a lot of games where he disappears. 5 targets in the playoff game. A game that he should have smashed.
Well, how many of those? Let me ask you, how many of those? How many of those games was Amari Cooper on the field?
Amari Cooper didn't do that much last year, though. I guess is part of what I'm getting at. Like,
did he do enough to command enough of a target share that it would take away from CeeDee Lamb, where none of these other jabronis can?
Yeah, but I guess that's where it comes back. Where if you're that talented, it shouldn't be the case. Like I don't know. I'm saying it's a tougher. I think it's a tougher dynamic to figure out than the market thinks it is, which the market thinks it is. Oh, we like CeeDee Lamb. He's young. He's good. He's going to see 27% of the targets. I don't think it's that simple.
So the way that you're kind of phrasing it right now, that when we're thinking about tiers and how to draft these guys, Kupp, Jefferson, Chase, tier 1. Davante Adams, tier 2. It seems like we both like Mike Evans in that tier. Is CeeDee Lamb in this tier, or is he the best of tier 3?
He's in this tier, and maybe it's the drafts. I'm looking at more casual ADP, and he's going 19th overall, and like that's a huge buy. But I've seen him go at like the end of round 1 in a lot of kind of sharper drafts, and that's where I'm a little bit more sketchy. But I definitely think he's in tier 2. He has to be in tier 2.
All right. Is there anyone else who deserves to be in tier 2? Because I am thinking about breaking this up into tier 2 and tier 3 with like 5 or 6 guys that I like, but I have no idea. Like, it feels like their range of outcomes is super huge.
So there's one other player. You probably call me a homer, but
okay. How can Stefan Diggs and Gabriel Davis be the 2 best receivers in football? Please answer me that.
Because it's a team that's going to challenge the entire NFL in terms of scoring. They're going to challenge the entire. They are. Roll your eyes. Am I wrong? They're a team that's going to challenge the entire NFL in terms of pass rate over expectation. They're going to be top 5 in pass rate over expectation. And Stefan Diggs is really, really good. I mean, he had a really shitty year from the efficiency standpoint. Last year, his catch rate fell from 77% to 63%. And if you just think it settles somewhere in between, I mean, he's 166 targets 2 years ago, 164 targets last year. He had a really boring season, but he was like wide receiver 7 last year with a really boring season in which his catch rate fell 14%.
I am pro Steph Diggs. I don't know if it's the back end of this tier or the beginning of the next tier. That he's not my problem. It's Gabriel Davis that's my problem. And
Gabriel Davis is classic guy. There's a few of these guys where years ago they would have been so overvalued because of
and they're not already.
And they're not this year. No, like him, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think there's a group of guys that like in previous years, we'd be like, people would be overvaluing like the huge playoff game or for Amon-Ra, the end of season success that he had. And now I think people are like out leveling themselves where they're like, no, we got to be like, we got to be even keeled here. And they're almost not factoring it in enough. It happened with Leonard Fournette last year. By myself and others too, where we were like, we just like completely threw out his playoff success and instead of just waiting it somewhat. So Gabriel Davis, if you look, God, I wish I remember who tweeted this, but I think it might've been Hayden Winks might've tweeted it, but his expected points per game in any games that Beasley or Sanders were out, just expected points based on opportunity was wide receiver 18 last year. And I think he has a huge upside case. And the other thing with teammates too, is they don't always have to play off one another directly. Like it's not like, you can't be high on Diggs and high on Gabriel Davis when, there's scenarios where there's a scenario where Gabe Davis goes absolutely ham and Stefan Diggs disappoints. And we're factoring that into both their ranges of outcomes, but that doesn't necessarily mean we have to buy Gabe Davis and fade Stefan Diggs. We can still buy both players at their individual price tags.
Yeah, but the individual price tag for Davis just keeps going up and up and up and up. Do you really want to take
it's going high.
So like the example that I've used looking at like drafts over the past week on DraftKings, you might be stuck in a situation at the end of round 3, beginning of round 4, where you could have Gabriel Davis or Cam Akers. That's a pretty no-brainer to me.
Yeah, I'm taking Cam Akers. Like Gabriel Davis ADP has gone huge. I think the ceiling's fantastic. We have him like somewhere between wide receiver 25 and 30.
Okay, I think that's completely fair, but that's not how he's being drafted.
He was for a while, and recently
let's go live in the past. Can I have some lottery numbers from 8 fucking weeks ago too?
Dude, you're the one who fucking boxed me into this Gabriel Davis corner before even hearing my take, okay? He was going as wide receiver 25 on FFPC. Like the underdog drafts.
Don't know what that is. People should play on DraftKings.
Or the DraftKings, like some of the best ball drafts, a lot of the best ball drafters are the type of drafters that are really, really going to like Gabriel Davis. Come August in your home league, Gabriel Davis isn't going to go off the board at wide receiver 22. You're going to be able to get him in the 5-6 turn, and he's an amazing value at the 5-6 turn.
Okay, that is a very logical case I can buy into. That's just not what I'm seeing right now. So past people and future people, remember, Gabe Davis, great value, but anytime in the now, terrible value apparently. And that's really going to change when you go to draft. It's not going to keep going up.
So who do you have between Gabe Davis and Amari Cooper?
Amari Cooper. That is an ultimate no-brainer.
Yeah, we have Cooper ahead, but I think it's like, but this is also, again, where I was saying that wide receiver is weaker in this range than it was before. Like, it's weaker in these rounds, right? Like,
sure, but that's
because I'm going up the board. I'm like, I love Gabe, like Amari Cooper. Like, you can see some of the concerns. Chris Godwin, you've got the injury stuff. I think Allen Robinson's really being overdrafted. Denver guys, I don't know what to do with. DK Metcalf, I don't want to put I mean, this range of the draft's just a little bit weaker overall. That's not Gabe Davis's fault.
No, but the difference between Brendan Cooks, Amari Cooper is like one pick. The difference between those two guys and Gabriel Davis in the moment is like 15 to 20 picks.
Right.
So
I don't know. You got to get out of the Gabe Davis hungry drafts. Got to find the people that don't.
You mean all of them? There's one Gabe Davis guy in every draft.
Maybe that's the problem.
I'm going to look fucking foolish next year, by the way, when he's wide receiver 1 this year. I'm going to it'll be one of those things that we don't talk about on the show.
So you did the who's this year's Cooper Kupp. I'm not saying it's Gabe Davis, but like there are archetypes of players that I think can leap drafts by a huge amount. And I think Gabe Davis does fit that archetype of player that could, legitimately jump a ton. But we have to factor in, the base case and the risk case too. So we're actually pretty in line where he should go overall, but there's absolutely a chance that you look very foolish for having anti-Gabe Davis sentiment.
Well, we're almost an hour into this. Do you want to pause our conversation?
We're not through tier 2.
Yeah, we're through tier 2. We're still on the fence about Stefon Diggs. The rankings so far are Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Davante Adams, Mike Evans, CeeDee Lamb. I think those 6 are the top 6 for right now. We might be able to rearrange these towards the end once we have different feelings about it. And Steph Diggs is kind of the tweener in between. The next few guys, the next like 5, even 6 guys, because I mean, Deontay Johnson's tough to throw into this tier because I think that his upside is a bit lower than someone like T. Higgins, for example, although his safety is almost unmatched at this point. And there's 2 guys that people aren't treating like they got an upgrade at quarterback when I mean, it's kind of the opposite case. So, like, Deontay Johnson did get an upgrade at quarterback by whether it's Trubisky or it's not Howell, it's
Pickett.
It's got to be an upgrade over last year, Ben Roethlisberger. It just has to be.
So,
and then, but there's the other scenario too, like the flip side scenario of, well, Michael Pittman has to be better because Matt Ryan is replacing Carson Wentz, which maybe it's probably a wash. And then Terry McLaurin, although he's being drafted later, is like, what an upgrade at quarterback. Is Carson Wentz an upgrade over Tyler Heineke? No, not really.
Dude, we caught some flack from the Washington fans. Our Terry McLaurin, our initial projection actually went down when we put Wentz at quarterback instead of Heineke, which I actually think from an upside efficiency standpoint, like I think you'd rather have Heineke, but I guess from a floor standpoint, maybe Wentz in terms of target share might be a little bit more stable. Like maybe the overall team's a little bit more stable. I'm not even sure if that's true, but I guess that'd be the argument. McLaurin seems like people have started to overreact to that situation. I think he's a good value.
Yeah, he's dropped. He's way down the list now.
Like McLaurin and Pittman to me, I feel like are very similar. And I'm seeing Pittman go substantially earlier.
Pittman's going at pick 30 right now, which seems way too high. And McLaurin's going at pick 45. He's going 15 picks later. You can pass on that pick someone else, and then get McLaurin with your next pick if you really want to. Like that's not even like, oh, you'll have to risk it. Like, no, that's happening.
Yeah. So the last time we pulled up we ran the DraftKings best ball ADP is we had Pittman like 16 spots higher, which is very substantial.
It doesn't feel like there's that big of a difference considering if it was Pat Mayo's personal evaluation of raw talent, which you should not take into any consideration, I think that McLaurin's a better receiver.
I'm with you. I mean, we bake in the ADP into our ranking. So like on our DK ranks, we have Pittman. We basically have it Pittman, Deontay Johnson, McLaurin, but we have some guys we haven't talked about ahead of these 3. But we have it in that order if you did not bake in the ADP at all. And we bake in the ADP because you want to try and build a super team. You also want to respect the market a little bit. But if you didn't, McLaurin, we would have McLaurin higher than Pittman by a little bit.
So here are the tier 3 candidates that I have to go either along with Diggs or bump Diggs up into tier 2. Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Deebo, I mean, I'm not putting Deebo there. That's how the projections have him. I don't know why I wrote down Deebo. Deebo's going down. Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, and T. Higgins. What are the chances Davante Smith outscores A.J. Brown this year?
I think it's
60-40, 70-30.
No, I think it's like 75-25.
Really? You think it's that big of a difference?
I think A.J. Brown has proven himself to be one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And, Davante Smith has not.
Okay. Fair point. But that's another offense that theoretically will run a lot, correct?
Yeah, they have a really wide range of outcomes. So there's part of me that wants to bet on Philly strongly, because if you look at their numbers last year, they came out of the gate with one of the higher pass rates over expectation. And now there's a lot of narrative to how the rest of the season played out and how it dictates what happens this year, but it wasn't really working. They found this run heavy approach that worked. They earned the playoff hunt and they ran the ball a shit ton. And there's a lot of people are saying, well, why wouldn't they just do that again this year? It worked for them down the stretch last year. But the flip side of that is the team they want to be is the team that they tried to be at the beginning of the season. Now they bring in A.J. Brown. You get another year with Jalen Hurts, and maybe they throw a lot more. So I think there's actually a wide range of outcomes in terms of where their play calling sits, which adds some intriguing upside to the team, but it feels like the market's really baked all that in. So it's kind of all of what I just said just kind of comes out in the wash.
So A.J. Brown is 75% favorite, according to you, to outscore Devonta Smith this year. Injuries notwithstanding anything that goes along with this. What are the chances T. Higgins outscores Jamar Chase?
I think that one's closer, actually. I think that's
60-40?
I was going to say like 65-35, maybe 60-40, somewhere in there.
Okay. And that's good. And that's,
I think T. Higgins is really good. I think people sometimes overanalyze, like, oh, well, if you take away his few big weeks, it's like, well, he had a few big weeks. Like those points count. So I think he's a really talented wide receiver. He was a boom bust prospect that boomed in his first year, had a really, kind of frustrating start of the first season. He was that guy that we're playing in DFS every week, like saying it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it did happen. Eventually it happened in the playoffs too. So in the Super Bowl. So yeah, I'm pretty into T. Higgins. I definitely think he belongs in this tier with the other guys you mentioned, this third tier.
But I mean, we compared A.J. Brown with a guy who's going way later than him. We're comparing T. Higgins to a guy who's going above him in drafts and saying that he might have like a 35-40% chance of beating that guy in overall fantasy points this year. So I think that's a strike for him, not against him in this circumstance. Chances, Keenan Allen, how big of a favorite is he to outscore Mike Williams?
I don't know. From a median perspective, like he's likely to outscore him, but Mike Williams might have more seasons where he has like a crazy impactful season, I guess.
So I think that case alone, I think bumps Keenan Allen to the bottom of this tier. And then you have Tyreek.
Yeah, I think he's bottom of the tier. He's kind of high in our full PPR ranks because it's a team that's gonna he's a team that's gonna run a lot of plays. They're going to have maybe not a crazy high pass rate, but they're kind of like Dallas with a little bit pass happier coach. So that's going to be a lot of pass attempts. And you throw in a possession receiver into that, he's just going to catch a lot of balls. And even though he's older and maybe not super explosive, if he stands upright, it's hard for him to be bad in that offense and with his skill set. It's just mathematically difficult. But at the same time, not exactly the archetype that I absolutely love to draft here. So I've had a lot of trouble with Keenan Allen. I do agree that as a result, I'd probably put him at the bottom of the tier.
The thing is, can we even bump him down to the next year? Because I'm with you. Like, Keenan Allen is going to be one of those guys that approximately produces where you drafted him at. There's very little chance that he exceeds that. But with an injury or, just attrition, getting older, whatever it might be, there's a chance that he could substantially underperform that if Josh Palmer or Parham or Gerald Everett or Mike Williams or whoever, or even Eckler just gets more involved in the receiving. I mean, it's hard for him to get more involved in the receiving game. And I mean, that's one of the cases for Allen, is that he's kind of steady Eddie. You know what you're going to get from him, but you're going to pass on a lot of guys with the substantial upside. And it's hard to factor that into rankings because Tyreek, Higgins, and A.J. Brown, substantially higher upsides than Keenan Allen. But he's probably going to score around the same amount of points as them.
Yeah, he's probably going to score more by a little bit.
That's
why he's so hard to rank.
Well, how would you rank Hill versus Waddle in terms of what the percentage is that one outscores the other?
So I'm against our ranks a little bit here. I'm very pro Waddle. I'm more concerned about Hill. Elite playmaking upside, extremely talented player, but Waddle had, a very, very encouraging rookie season. And I think he's going to out target Tyreek Hill just based on how they're used. It's where does the efficiency come in? And you've got a coach coming over from San Francisco that they just dominated in terms of yak and their ability to get yards after catch. Waddle's problem last year was the way the offense was designed. He was getting these short 8-out routes and had absolutely nowhere to run, no room to run. So if he can have a high target share, like I think he will, gobble up a high catch rate, but now we add in a little bit more plus yak ability. He's one of the wide receivers I am excited about at, like that 3-4 turn in the draft, if you want to take wide receiver. So I'd put these guys pretty close to 50-50 in terms of who's going to outscore who. I guess Tyreek Hill, just because of his big play upside, we're giving a little bit more ceiling to, but I think they're very, very close.
So the way that we've talked to tier 3, you still have Diggs as sort of a tweener between 2 and 3. It sounds like you're leaning more towards 2. I'm kind of digging number 3 for Stefon Diggs, but the top of that tier, making him number 7 overall, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen. Then you have like the next tier of guys, and we're going to cut it off here unless there's someone you really want to put into tier 3. Deebo, Deontay Johnson, Waddle, Pittman, DJ Moore, Cooks, McLaurin, Metcalf, the Denver guys, Hollywood Brown, Mike Williams, Michael Thomas. He's a name that is just impossible to figure out what to do with at this point. He's either the best value or worst value in drafts as we currently understand his situation. But should Deontay Johnson be in that tier just because he's like Keenan Allen?
I don't think so. I agree with you that from an efficiency standpoint, there's no doubt that whoever plays quarterback's an upgrade over Big Ben, but I'm a little worried, though, that from a fantasy scoring perspective, that Big Ben and Deontay weren't the worst pairing just because he was able to catch so many balls and was targeted so frequently. And I don't know if we can assume that same target rate with a new quarterback. And they also, at times, had this offense that threw a lot of short 8-out routes, and they had a decently high pass rate as a result of that. And so I think we might see a loss in volume for Deontay Johnson that I'm worried doesn't get completely offset with improved efficiency from the quarterback perspective. So I would not have him, thrown into this tier.
I almost feel like Diggs and Higgins are their own kind of tier, with A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and Keenan Allen being their own kind of tier. Is that too micro tier for you?
I think it's all pretty close. I mean, I've got Diggs in a tier above, and then I think I could see going like Diggs, Lamb, Evans as a tier, and then like Keenan, and then maybe with T in there, and then Keenan, Tyreek, Deebo next.
DK,
I know you're not into Deebo.
Let's finish with Deebo, because this is an interesting one. I believe I've spoke about this a few times, but I want to get your assessment of the situation. Our projections have him wide receiver number 3, which I think is absolutely insane. There's no 3, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of it is projecting in the market share of rushes and touchdowns that he gets there, plus going through the air with everything. And I know this is, you kind of just mentioned this, if you take out the big games, what happens? Well, just take out the rushing touchdowns every week from Deebo Samuel. All of a sudden, he kind of sucks as a receiver.
So, Deebo, I have a little bit of a Davante Adams take with him, where I came into the offseason thinking he'd be extremely overvalued, and then I felt like maybe not. Right now, we have him as wide receiver 11 on DraftKings, and he's going as wide receiver 7. And we're baking in the ADP a little bit. So we do have him as overvalued. My concerns with Deebo, one, the rushing efficiency that you hit on. Like, guys don't score a rushing touchdown once every 10 rushing attempts. It just does not happen. That's what, a 10% rush TD rate. Like, some of the best guys in the league are 4 to 5% maybe. So you're going to take that out. He might not even run nearly as much. And his yards per carry was super high too.
Well, here's the thing. Hold on. Here's the thing. If they stop running him so much, I'm very willing to move him back up the board because, I mean, he had a great Pro Bowl in terms of targets, but just look at his target share. 4 targets in the playoffs, 4 targets, 3 targets, 6 targets. That's
so
not
I think
great.
Regardless of the Russian stuff, I think the Russian stuff's a little bit of a red herring with the target share, where I think a lot of the rush attempts he's getting are plays. Like, I don't think he's lining up in the backfield a ton on passing plays where he and then not getting targeted, you know? So I think that's a little bit of a red herring. I don't know if it affects the target share that much. The problem is when they're healthy and Brandon Ayuk's not in the doghouse, it's a very low pass volume team that has George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk to throw to too, and they will throw to random guys. So that's the difficulty with Wayne Deebo is how much do you want to bet on talent? Because then clearly an extremely talented player. There are not many players ever in the NFL that go over 2 yards per route run in each of their first 3 seasons. And he's done it in a variety of ways. Flip side is, yeah, when you run the math on the team, how often they're going to pass, baking in some risk, you know, with Trey Lance and the divvying up the target shares. Like someone was asking me, like, are you baking in risk that Deebo gets traded? And I'm like, that would not be risk to me. I would want Deebo to get traded somewhere where he could see a lot more targets. I think that would be better for him, despite how efficient he's been in San Francisco. So that's the difficulty with Deebo. Ultimately, I think you can't drop him any further than outside of the top 12 wide receivers, 12 to 13 wide receivers, just based on talent. But I'm not going to draft him in the top 10 either.
Starting against the Rams last year was the first game he had more than 2 carries. He started at 5 attempts, and that went up to 8, 6, 8, 6, 5, 7, 8. He was used as a hybrid running back from that point on. Now, he did score a rushing touchdown in all of those games except for 2. Sometimes he scored multiple touchdowns, which really saves your fantasy season. But let's now go over to starting at that point in the games in terms of target rate. He had 5, 2, 4, 1, 5, 11. That would be fantastic. 6 and 6. Even 6 isn't cutting it if he's going to be wide receiver 12. Like, I don't want him running the ball unless he's going to score a touchdown.
I just think that running the football had less to do with those targets dropping off than
I do too. But what if they do continue to run the ball with him? Then he's kind of fucked.
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with whether or not he runs the ball. I just think on San Francisco, he's not going to get a ton of targets, and that's the issue, regardless of what he's involved in the rushing game. I want him involved in the rushing game because I think the targets aren't going to change one way or the other.
I see. I think that. I mean, if you just look at the beginning of the season, so I just listed you the targets per game. He had 1 over 6 targets in the final 9 games of the year. Previous to that, 9, 9, 11, 9, 13, 10, 8, and 12.
Yeah. I mean, correlation does not equal causation.
But you don't see the direct parallel of where this cutoff is?
Do you see the direct parallel to George Kittle going ham and Brandon Ayuk not being benched?
There is, but one, he's touching the ball out of the backfield, not running as many routes, and he needs to be ultra efficient running the ball.
But I don't even think that's true. Look up the routes run. I don't think as a percentage it's that much lower. I don't think that's true.
Are they like real routes? Because, I mean, you might be lining up at wide receiver, but we know human nature is going to be, hey, if I know I'm going to carry the ball 8 to 10 times a game, might not be putting in max effort here.
Okay, well, I can't tell you whether or not he was putting in max effort because he knew he was going to run the ball some.
I would just say that when you draw the line of when he started carrying the ball out of the backfield and being used as a running back and averaging 7 carries per game, his average targets went down to around 4 per game, where when he was touching the ball once or twice as a rusher, if that, he was averaging somewhere in the neighborhood of 9.5 targets a game.
I mean, I've said my piece. I understand how it looks on paper, but
watching the games too, that helped.
I don't think that's like I think he just took plays that were already running plays and played running back on those plays.
I agree, but that's leveling up. Just think about it logically. If you have a guy who's taking a pounding like that, and then you're putting him back out wide at the same time, chances are you're just not going to go to that side. You got to give the guy a bit of a break.
Listen. you're not taking a pounding when you just score a touchdown on 1 every 6 carries.
I suppose that's true. All right. I like this so far. So here are the rankings to this point. And we really covered a lot on this show, obviously, going really deep into the rankings.
Got in deep.
So we got through 3 tiers. Cup, Jefferson, Chase, 1, 2, 3. Adams, Evans, Lamb, 4, 5, 6. Stephen Diggs, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen. I think you should return to the show as we continue to flesh this out a little bit more. I like this start. This is what I wanted from this show because I want to put some thought into the rankings, where guys should go, and I like having these back and forth. I think playing pros and cons and upside, downside is important when trying to construct rankings. Like I can just copy and paste someone's rankings and put them out there and be like, oh, Pat, good rankings. No, I want to talk this through. I want to make sure that it's good.
We're gonna have to do a part 2. We gotta.
I mean, this is gonna be like
Juju Smith-Schuster takes.
He's terrible. They're
oh baby.
Save
it for part 2.
I like okay, fucking Juju. Kidding me?
This year's Cooper Cup.
Really? Would you like to?
Some of us have done a TikTok video proclaiming as much.
Like Cooper Cup, like from last year, or Cooper Cup like after he's dead? Like, did you maybe put parameters on this of like what the stat line is going to be? Because 0 for 0 for 0 is not going to be great. Or 84 catches for 84 yards.
Did you know 2 years ago Juju scored the same points as Deontay Johnson?
I did know that.
Because I feel like people forget that or think it was like ages ago. This is the biggest quarterback upgrade in NFL history. This Juju season could go south in a lot of ways, but it could also go really, really right. And like a week into the season, I think we're going to know one way or the other super quickly.
Well, it's pretty easy just to take MVS at half the cost when he's going to be better than Juju anyway. So that would be the smart move.
There's just no season where MVS has seen more than, I mean, even 20% of targets would just be like a huge ceiling season for MVS.
We just talked about a team that had Davante Adams, and our problem with Davante Adams that he was coming from a low pass rate offense. You think that going into Kansas City and potentially being the number 1 without Davante Adams, what is Juju Davante Adams now?
Dude, and part of the reason why Davante Adams had a 33% target share is because MVS couldn't get more than 15% of the targets because he's a downfield threat. He's not going to see that type of target share. Whereas Juju, like he could potentially see 25% of the team's targets. And like, if you're playing with Patrick Mahomes, if he's healthy, we don't know if he's healthy, but if he is, and he can turn back the clock a little bit, there's just a huge ceiling there that isn't there for MVS.
I would say the opposite, because the same routes that Juju runs are just the same routes that Juju runs. They have another guy who's better on the team who does those anyway.
Dude, Juju ran different routes when he didn't have a guy that couldn't throw the ball more than 6 yards on the team. Or maybe Juju can run all sorts of routes.
I mean, did he take the concrete out of his shoes? Did he regain his speed? Or does he just move around like he's a zombie? But not like the new school zombie from 28 Days Later, like the 1971 Dawn of the Dead zombie. Just, that's how he runs.
All right, we got to do Juju versus Brandon Cooks bet. We'll have to do.
Yes, Brandon Cooks, 100%. Let's go. Free money.
Okay. Yeah. I'll roll over the money I didn't pay you from last year. We'll put it on that.
Excellent. We'll do 100 on that one. We still have 100 to go from the Marv Jones Chenault bet.
Oh man, I got nothing there.
I mean, you lost all your money with Odell last year, but no, let's double down on Juju. Yeah, smart move.
I'm confident with who I am. And
I can hear it in your voice. You sound very confident.
Let's get okay.
It's awesome because you're so much better at this than me, but it doesn't seem that way in this moment.
Hey, sometimes you need someone to drag you down to earth a little bit. So I think for me though, with Juju, it's like visualizing a range of outcomes thing where I don't know. I could be wrong, but I just think there's like a 10 to 20% chance he has a nuclear season.
And his floor is out of football.
Well, his floor is very bad. But he's just going just enough later where I'm almost like don't care as much. Which maybe again plays into why like I have a more pro Gabe Davis sentiment, even though we have him ranked similarly, just because I guess it depends where you're talking Gabe Davis is going. But once you start getting into round 6 or even end of round 5 this year, I think a lot of players carry a lot of risk. And I start to focus more on ceiling, even perhaps a bit earlier than in other years.
Okay. Mike Leone at 2 Hats. One Mike, one of my bestest friends in the fantasy football space. You can check out all of his work at Establish the Run. I saw you on with Levitan the other day. You're real big time now. You're no longer the poor man's Pat Mayo.
The poor man's Pat Mayo. I don't know. I don't have the Pat Mayo shirt game. Usually my shirts are a topic of conversation, so I got to work on that at least.
Yeah, at least your t-shirt isn't bacon necked this time. You're looking very presentable these days.
I'll take it.
All right. Secretly the rich man's Pat Mayo because he has way more money than me because he actually wins at this stuff. Everyone should go check out Leone at 2 Hats, 1 Mike, EstablishTheRun.com. Thank you all for watching. That's, I guess, what we're going to call part 1 of the wide receiver rankings, unless you're only really concerned about drafting 10 wide receivers this year. We'll get more into it, more rapid pace, but I mean, listen, we talked around a lot of guys deeper down the list in some situations as well. So hopefully that was instructive. I'll have the full list come out. Running back, wide receiver, all the positions, plus the top 150 when I do the top 150 show. So I'll hit up Mike again for another chat like this and expect a few more chats with Jake Seeley about running backs in the same parameters. We try to develop some of these tiers. Still early, still plenty of time to go. You're probably not doing your draft this week, but if you are, do it. DraftKings Best Ball. Highly recommend that. If you want the full draft kit, hit the description. All the links are down there for free right now. Build your own custom projections at runthesims.com. Completely free for the season-long projection tool. I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!